Last asked whether there were any questions in regard to the development of my book, my story. I didn't know how in-depth some of those questions were going to be. I'll now try and answer. Something that's always interested me was how the effect of the environment one lives in leads to the development and evolution of a culture and a peoples. I looked into history and looked at the Northern Europeans of the Germanic and Nordic people who live in a very harsh environment during winter, and how that might lead to their interactions and enemy towards a culture living in a much more temperate climate. So those thoughts led me to loosely base my aggressor and my continents on the Northern Europeans and the more agrarian cultures of Southern Europe and North Africa, which once again led me to use the European continents and the African continents as my setting, with the Mediterranean being the barrier between the two until such time as ships were developed to travel the between seas. I wanted my readers to be vaguely familiar with the setting so they get immersed immediately into the story with an understanding that they knew something of the area and the land that I create. When one considers the harshness of a northern winter, with its icy winds, deep snow, freezing temperatures, it's not hard to believe that the people living in that environment would desire to search for a more temperate climate. Food would have been a crucial factor in their survival. Diet would be basic and monotonous. Salted meats, dried fruits, root vegetables and grains made into porridge. Very boring, and starvation always would have been close at hand. This led to me looking closely at the history of the Vandals, Goths and the Viking people of Northern Europe to be my aggressors, always searching for a better life. In Southern Europe and North Africa, with a more agrarian society where crops could be grown, hunting could be done all year round, harvesting from nature was available. Obviously, that lifestyle was far more comfortable and achievable. Trade would be highlighted all year round. So I based my aggressors on soldiers who had a history of raiding and fighting and struggling for life, finding a more temperate land that they looked at just taking what they needed, and the opposition were merely hunters and trackers, often just brought together by displaced noble men and women. As mentioned previously, I borrowed heavily from the history of Northern Europe and Northern Africa to base my world. I wanted the North to be as harsh as possible, to create the warlike people that are my Brocken, the aggressor. In the south, in a more temperate climate, I chose to overlay North Africa with the plains and mountains of North America, with vast grasslands, rich lands, heavily populated by wild animals, where the people had domesticated many of the herds to have a very comfortable agrarian lifestyle. I did populate my world of Tol with three distinct races: the plainsmen, the elves and the Dinni. Each of these races needed their own environment in which to evolve and to develop into the peoples they became. One of the most challenging aspects of world building is creating an environment the reader will willingly immerse themselves in before the plot and the characters even develop. The reader needs to see themselves in your world comfortably, so an author must vividly depict the environment to draw the reader in, to make them as comfortable and knowledgeable of the setting before the story begins. As an author, we have to use all our senses in our descriptions of our world: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. It is a challenge. It's something that an author quite often forgets to include as they get caught up in the imagination of their own stories and the character development and the plot development. One must always consider the environment and making the reader comfortable within that environment. The world building must remain consistent throughout the story. The author must continually develop and remember the reader wants to be involved in the environment. One of the tools an author uses is creating their own maps, keeps themselves centred, gives an understanding of distance travelled, of the environments, of the mountains, the forests, the plains, and the people that inhabit it. The geographical and environmental aspects of my two continents, the North and South, is at the heart of the chaos created in this first book. The environment, of course, influences a society's growth, its customs, its celebrations, the way they live and share and trade. The interaction of the characters with their environment, of course, creates the backdrop of the whole story. An author cannot afford to be engrossed in its characters and the conflict of the characters to the detriment of the world they created. I hope I answered some of those questions well. They were rather in-depth and it's a little daunting. Any more questions, please follow along. Thank you for tuning in.